Hello, hello, hello. Good evening. Welcome. My name is Ian Rowe, along with founding principal Joynette Mongwal. I'm the founder and CEO of Vertex Partnership Academies, our virtues-based international baccalaureate public charter high school. Welcome to the home of the Lions. And welcome to what we think should be a very informative discussion on the effects of cell phones and social media on young people's mental health and academic outcomes, and what different types of schools are doing about it. I'm honored to be joined this evening by four outstanding individuals. Jonathan Haidt, NYU professor, social psychologist, and author of The Coddling of the American Mind, great book. Doug Lemov, a national leader on instructional practice, and also someone who has written extensively on the role of cell phones in schools. Graham Degoni, founder of Yonder, and also a former professional soccer player, which most people don't know. And Lynn James Turnbull, the founding principal of New Pathways Academy, a public middle school in the Bronx that's on its pathway to become an international baccalaureate school. Before I ask Jonathan to kick us off, I thought I would share just a couple of the recent research, both at the federal and at the state level, really driving our decision-making as relates to cell phones. Nationally, last May, the US Surgeon General issued an advisory about the effects of social media has on youth mental health. The Surgeon General said, quote, "There are ample indicators that social media can pose a risk of harm to the mental health and well-being of children and adolescents. Social media use by young people is nearly universal, with up to 95% of young people aged 13 to 17 reporting using a social media platform of some type, and more than a third saying they use social media almost constantly." On the state level, in October of 2023, the New York State Attorney General joined forces with a bipartisan coalition of 32 other attorney generals. So 33 states in total filed a federal lawsuit against Meta for harming young people's mental health and contributing to the youth mental health crisis. The lawsuit alleges that the company knowingly designed and deployed harmful features on Instagram, Facebook, and its other social media platforms that purposefully addict children and teens. At Vertex, when we opened our school doors in 2022, we initially had a policy that allowed cell phones to be carried by students, even if they were supposed to be off. Well, guess what happened? They weren't always off. What we found was that teachers had to spend time policing phones, which was just not a productive use of time. This academic year, we moved to an approach in which we each morning our students deposit their cell phones, Apple Watches, and AirPods into a Yonder pouch, locked and returned at the end of the day. It's extraordinary what our students have said. The only reason they felt the need to be on their devices before was that they felt everyone else was on their device. And one final point I'd like to make is that our school is grounded in the four cardinal virtues, and we don't have that slide, of courage, justice, temperance, and wisdom. And each of the virtues has a corresponding I statement. So for example, courage is I reject victimhood and boldly persevere even in times of uncertainty and struggle. Oh, you can see it on your screen now. When we introduced the new cell phone policy, we put it in the context of temperance. I lead my life with self-discipline because I am responsible for my learning and my behavior. I share this because if you're moving to a more restrictive cell phone policy, it's important to ground it in the ethos of the school as a way to help build, in this case, the tools of self-restraint and self-regulation, which are so important to future success. So with those opening comments, I'm really pleased to invite Jonathan Haidt to the stage to really give us a great grounding of what has been going on in this on this topic really since 2007, when iPhones and other digital devices were introduced to youth culture. Jonathan, thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much.
Yes.
Pardon me. Sorry about this noise. Sorry, I'm having some vocal cord problems, so I have to speak quietly into this mic, but this should work well. Okay, well, thanks so much, Ian. It's a real pleasure to be here. There is so much innovation in the education space, and if whatever you're trying to do, if the kids are spending their attention on their lap, on the phone hidden in their lap, you're just not going to get very far. And so it's great that Vertex, actually this is now a little too loud. Maybe pull down the volume a bit. Lower the volume on the, okay, good, I think that's better, thanks. And so it's great to see that Vertex is innovating here. Vertex is freeing up kids' attention. Vertex is working with Yonder. So I'm very pleased to be part of this panel discussion. Now, what I want to talk to you about today is what I found while writing my new book, The Anxious Generation. It comes out March 26th. The book is mostly about what happened to kids in terms of mental health and flourishing. But there is now really clear evidence that a phone-based childhood is incompatible with education. So in December, Derek Thompson in The Atlantic wrote this article. It sure looks like phones are making students dumber. And he plotted the recent PISA data. This is the big global survey, survey of kids' accomplishment. And what you see here is that from 2000 to 2010, there's no trend in math, reading, or science. But as in all the graphs I'll show you, when we look at 2010 to 2015, everything changes. So accomplishment begins to plunge in the 2010s. Now, Thompson didn't cover the NAEP, but referred to as the nation's report card. This is the best measure we have of academic achievement in the US. And what you see here is that since the 70s, American kids have made slow but steady progress. They are a little better academically than they were back in the 70s. So the numbers have been going up steadily until 2012. Now, this was only really attended to because everyone said, oh my God, look what COVID did. Look at that big COVID drop. And that's true. You see the COVID drop. But what nobody noticed when that was pointed out, what nobody seems to have noticed, is that the drop actually began after 2012. After 30 years of progress, our students began to get less academically able as soon as they had smartphones in their pockets. And it's not just the direct academic. Raise your hand if you are an educator in some way. Or you work in a school? Okay, so about a third of you. How many of you would say that that students' mental health is one of your top 2 or 3 concerns? Raise your hand. Okay, this is what educators say all around the country from K through university. So PISA has embedded within it, a New Zealand friend pointed this out to me in the data set a few years ago, and Jean Twenge and I analyzed these 6 questions about loneliness at school, alienation. I can't remember the text, but one of the questions is, I often feel lonely at school. All right, how much do students agree with that? And what you see is that through 2012, there's no trend. After 2012, it goes up. So as soon as students had a device in their pocket that was supposed to link them to other kids electronically, they suddenly feel more lonely at school. And that's a recipe for depression, for all kinds of problems. So let's look at why this is. What is it that phones are doing to children and to their education and to their mental health? And I can explain what's happened with 2 simple propositions. Childhood used to be based on play for the last several million years, maybe 100 million if you want to go back to the beginning of mammals. Mammals play, that's what we do to wire up our brains. But that play-based childhood began to fade out between 1980 and 2010. mental health didn't fall during that period, but the kids are getting weaker. And then they move all of a sudden, all of them onto smartphones, and that's when everything falls apart. So another way to say this is we have overprotected our children in the real world while underprotecting them online. That's it. It's that simple. That's what I think has caused this collapse of mental health. So I'll make some points very briefly. Ian doesn't think I can get through 40 slides in 20 minutes, but I will go very briefly through the argument. First, it's really important to see the data, to see the graphs of what happened. So this is data from college students. On the left side of the graph, you see 2010, 2012, all the students were millennials. Those were the rates of those disorders. Oh, but what's the yellow line? Well, as soon as Gen Z comes into college, their rates go up, but especially for psychological disorders. Gen Z is really different from the millennial generation, primarily because they are much more depressed and anxious. It's primarily anxiety and depression. Here is data. This also is from US undergraduates, representative colleges. And what you see is no trend before 2010, but as always, once we get into the 2010s, this is what happens. A huge increase, more than doubling, for anxiety and depression. Increases in the other things as well, but it is now a normal part. If you are an American, especially an American girl, it's just normal that you're anxious and depressed. That's just what they are, at least a third of them. It's not that everyone got more anxious and depressed, it's just Gen Z. It's only younger people. And there is a big gender effect. So here we see that while the relative increases are similar, but because girls start at a higher level, the total increase in depressed girls is much bigger than the total increase in the number of depressed boys. So again, being depressed is just a normal part of being an American girl. That's just a feature of being an American girl. You're depressed and anxious. Also note here, the 2021 data was during COVID lockdowns. It mattered, but not much. COVID was a blip compared to the arrival of the smartphone. And when we look by race, this is hitting everybody. So traditionally, it's been known that African Americans have slightly lower rates of anxiety, depression, and suicide than do white kids. And as we go through this period, everyone is up. I mean, you don't find a demographic group that stays flat. This is hitting everyone all over the country, and as you'll see in other countries. That was depression, this is anxiety. Once again, they're all going up in concert. Now, some people say, oh, this is just self-report data. Maybe Gen Z is they're just happy to admit it, that's all. And that could be healthy. But if that was the case, then we wouldn't see the same pattern in objective behavioral data, like hospital admissions for kids who cut themselves. Here's what we see for non-fatal self-harm, it's called. For the younger group, the rises are most unbelievable. Here were the rates before 2010, and here's what happened in the 2010s. Preteen girls, 10 to 14, they didn't used to cut themselves, but now they do. And we see the same thing for suicide. The suicide rates for 10 to 14-year-olds are much lower than for the older teens, but the increase is spectacular. For girls in particular, in a single year, there was a 67% increase in suicides. And that wasn't just a weird data blip, that was just the beginning of a large increase. And that points us to 2012 as a particularly important year. The same thing we find in Britain, Canada, Australia, and also New Zealand and Scandinavia, Northern Europe. So why is this happening at the same time, in the same way, in many, many countries? What is going on here? And my explanation is that it was the loss of the play-based childhood to be replaced by the phone-based childhood. Nobody has offered another explanation. There's nothing. Some of my critics say, oh, well, you can't prove it was the phones. And then I say, okay, I think I can, but you tell me what you think it was. Nothing. Nobody has an idea. The global financial crisis was much earlier. It was over by the time the Depression starts. So I believe what caused it is the end of the play-based childhood. We used to have this idea that children are out. We have all these children's stories. The kids are not usually with their parents. They're usually off on their own having adventures. But we don't allow that anymore. Now here, we don't really have enough people to do this, but I want you to all just think of the age at which you were let out. What was the age at which you could go outside and play? So if it was first grade, if you were out playing in first grade without an adult watching you, over at a friend's house or a playground, whatever, then your number is 6. Whereas if it wasn't until 7th grade, then your number is 12. Okay, everyone have your number? Everyone look at that? Everyone know their number? Okay, now I'm only going to ask people who were born 1984 or earlier. Raise your hand if you were born 1984 or earlier. Okay, so these are mostly Gen X and baby boomers. So just you. When I point to you, yell out your number real loud, okay? Just you. Yell it out. Okay, so this is what I always find. The norm was by first, second, or third grade, or 5 in one case, kids are out playing. And we all grew up during a huge crime wave when there was a lot of drunk driving and all kinds of things. By the 90s, crime had plummeted, drunk drivers were locked up, it got a lot safer, right? But what happens? So let's find out. Thank you, we now have some Gen Z, some students here. Okay, so everyone in the room, what we're doing here is look at what's the age at which you were let out to play, you could go out without an adult. Look at your number, pick your number there, what age. Now, everyone here who was born after 1995, raise your hand high. Raise your hand high if you're born after 1995. Okay, so you folks are all Gen Z. Okay, when I point to your section of the room, scream out your number. At what age were you let out? And if you aren't let out yet, say, not yet. Okay? All right, let's go for it. Yell it out. What is it?
12.
Yell it out loud. We have an 8, we have 12s, 13s, what else? Okay, what I can tell you is this is what I find. I've done this probably 30 or 40 times around the country and in the UK. This is how the norms have changed. As life got safer, we locked up our kids because we were terrified they'd be abducted or we didn't trust them to play outside without a supervisor. So we've lost the independent play-based childhood. What was it replaced by? The phone-based childhood. So this graph shows how technology was adopted in the USA. And what you can see is that there's always a period when everybody is buying a color TV, or everyone is buying a computer and getting a dial-up account on the internet in the 80s and 90s. And so the first wave was the PC and slow internet. As that rises, young people's mental health doesn't change. It actually gets a little bit better. But then we get the second wave, social media and the smartphone. They really come in the late 2000s, like 2009, 2010, people are really buying iPhones, smartphones. This is when the epidemic of mental illness begins. It's the second wave. The first wave, the internet, was amazing. But for kids to have a smartphone with social media in their pocket while they're going through puberty, that is really, really destructive, especially for girls. So we used to have a childhood where kids were out having adventures, and those of you who are my age, you remember, it just used to be a normal thing to put an extraterrestrial in your bicycle basket and ride around your town. It's just like a thing that we did back then. But now childhood is this. If you're a boy and you want to play video games with your friend, you have to go home to your own house. You can't play video games at his house. You have to go home, so you have your headset, your controller, and your screen, and then you can play. So childhood is now very solitary compared to what it was. I can show that another way. This is the number of minutes per day that Americans of different ages spend with their friends. Young people, the top line, spend a lot more time than people in the 30s, 40s, and 50s who are married, they have jobs. But what happens in this period we're talking about? Young people stop spending time with their friends. Now note that 2019 was before COVID. 2020 was during COVID lockdown. Do you see the COVID effect there? No. COVID, it was already plunging. COVID didn't even increase the trajectory. Our young people have been social distancing for a long time, and they were almost done by 2019. And even when they're together, they're not really together. As Ian said, a third of them say they're online, they're on social media almost all the time. So, let's see, what's this? And we don't wait until they become teenagers. This is a video I found on TikTok the animation isn't playing, but let's see if it does. The animation is not playing on this system, but you see this little boy frantically moving back and forth between two screens. It's really impressive, but imagine being that child's brain. Imagine what's happening to that boy's brain developing with all this intense, weird stimulation for hours every day. We give kids iPhones anytime we need a little peace and quiet, like at soccer practice for your older brother. Let the little girl have an iPhone, that'll keep her quiet. And we get them to practice early. We give them toy iPhones so they can be just like mommy. Let's see, is this one? Oh, all right, the video isn't playing, but all right, we'll forget it. I'll skip this one. It doesn't play. A third of my book lays out the damage. I don't have time to go into it here. In fact, I barely have time to read all the harms that come from a phone-based childhood. So what hits all kids, boys and girls, is this huge opportunity cost. That is, if you're spending 9 hours a day on your screens, which is the average now in America, 9 hours a day, not counting school or work or homework. This is just entertainment, leisure. It pushes out everything else. Reading, hobbies, talking to your parents, spending time with your friends, everything else gets pushed out. Especially time with friends is devastating, sleep becomes less, your attention gets fragmented, and about, depending on how you count it, 2 to 10% get addicted. Boys to video games, girls to social media. So a lot of kids are being really damaged by this. There are a lot of specific harms that hit girls more than boys from being on social media. You can just read that list yourself, and I think all the women and the girls in this room recognize that. Life online is savage for girls. Constant commenting on their looks, their face, their body, their life, everything. It's devastating. Now, the boys' story was a little harder to figure out. It's not as clear. Here I drew on Richard Reeves' recent book of Boys and Men. What's been happening with boys, it didn't start in 2010. Boys, it actually starts in the 80s. Boys have been withdrawing from the real world. Schools are set up to build on girls' strengths. Schools are not well set up for boys. Boys are medicated, they're told they have ADHD, they're not given recess. We keep cutting back on recess to make more time for math. We keep giving them homework. So boys have been dropping out of school for a long, long time. They're not going to college as much. They're not getting jobs as much. They're not becoming responsible fathers and husbands as much as they used to. Boys have been retreating from the real world, but man, is the virtual world getting better and better for them. I just mean more attractive. What boys really want to do, teenage boys, is play at war and have sex. And now you can do that online without leaving your bedroom. You can have amazing war battles with your friends, 50 a day. And not just incredible pornography, but now you can have an AI girlfriend. Someone just told me you can actually take your AI girlfriend out to dinner. You bring your laptop, you put it on the other side of the table, and you can have witty conversations. She can be as funny as you want, as deep as you want, as shallow as you want. You can have conversation, and whatever this program is, the most recent one, you can ask her to take a picture of the two of you at the restaurant so you can post it on social media. And what do you get? An AI-generated photo of you with your girlfriend at dinner at this fancy restaurant. So boys who no longer have the skills to approach an actual girl don't have to worry because they can just make them. So we're losing a generation of boys. That's been going on for a long time, but it accelerated in this period. To put this all together, this question asked of high school seniors, I often feel lonely. Do you agree with that or disagree? What we see is that in the 80s and 90s, the number agreeing was actually going down. But then in this period, boys and girls get very, very lonely. And Boys and girls are killing themselves, as we saw in those Senate hearings. So, in my remaining, I'm going to go 2 or 3 minutes overtime to talk about what schools and parents can do if they work together. Now, the reason we're stuck in this situation is not because we're stupid. It's exactly what Ian said before. Why are you on this thing if you agree that it's bad for you? And most members of Gen Z is not in denial. Gen Z sees this very clearly. Young people know that this is bad for them, so why are you on it? And as Ian said, it's because everyone else is on it. And that's the definition of a collective action problem. It's a problem that each individual can't solve because the costs are too high, but if we all do it, then the costs become very low. So I believe we can solve this problem. Maybe not all the way back to the levels of 2010, but I believe we can stop those graphs from rising and we can make them fall substantially if we do 4 things that are actually easy to do and that cost almost nothing. Here they are. No smartphones before high school. If we all just agree to only give our kids a flip phone, if you want to send them out into the world, fine, give them a phone. A flip phone. That's what the millennials had, and they weren't harmed by it. Secondly, no social media before 16. Now this one's going to be tougher, and it would be great if we had legislation that raised the age, but I'm assuming we're never going to get help from our Congress. I'm assuming our Congress is corrupt and inept, incapable of passing anything that's controversial. And even though there's huge bipartisan support for this, I'm not holding my breath for Congress to help us. But we can do it ourselves. When your kid comes to you and says, "Mom, I'm the only one who's not on Instagram," well, that's hard to hear. But if she says, "Mom, half of the kids in my class are on Instagram," then you say, "Well, okay, fine, you'll be in the other half. You guys can get together and play. I'll help you. I'll help you get together." The third one, and that's the big one for this audience, phone-free schools. There is absolutely no reason to give kids the greatest distraction machine ever while they're sitting in class. It's insane. So phone-free schools, and then the fourth one is much more childhood independence and free play. We have to, you can't just take away the phones and say, "All right, kid, stare at the wall, read a book, learn to knit, something." No, what kids want is each other. What they want is to be with their friends. So you have to give them the time, the ability, the place to just hang out without you looking over their shoulder. So to summarize it, if you give less, later, and better experience on screens, that's half of it. And this cartoon shows 2 parents, and the text says, "It's been so nice getting to interact with you for these past 6 years. Here's your first device." That's what a lot of parents experience. Once the kid gets on, you don't really see them again. And then the other half is give more, earlier, and better experience in the real world. So restore the play-based childhood. And to do that, I partnered with an amazing woman, Lenore Skenazy, who wrote the book Free Range Kids. And she is the greatest analyst and exponent of the importance of giving kids independence and free play. So please visit letgrow.org. We have a few really powerful programs. They're all free and very effective. This is the most important one, the Let Grow project. It's so simple. It's a homework assignment. You can give it to any grade, K through 8 especially. Go home, pick something that you think you want to do that you've never done before. Have you ever walked your dog? Can you water the plants? Can you go to the store and buy a quart of milk? Agree with your parents that you're going to do it, and then do it. And then you come back, and in class, you put it up on the board as a leaf on your tree. And the kids that, once you've done this 5 or 10 times, you have a really competent, confident kid. And while very few parents today would let their 8-year-old walk 2 blocks to a store, even though we all did it during the crime wave, but even though very few parents would let their 8-year-old walk to a store, if it's a homework assignment and everyone else is doing it, well then before you know it, everyone in the town is now seeing 8-year-olds without a supervisor. And it becomes to look normal. So the Let Grow project is transformative for the kids, for the parents who overcome their anxiety, and for the community which comes to see, you know what? 8-year-olds can actually cross a street. They can actually buy a quart of milk. Play Club is even simpler, especially if you live in a place where there is crime, where you don't want to let the kids wander around on their own. Just open the playground after school. Let kids sign up for that as an after-school activity, to just hang out with their friends and play. So it is so important to get phones out of school. I wrote an Atlantic article which summarizes all the research, the academic research on this. Many schools are doing it, like Vertex. Not a one has regretted it. I've never found a story of a school that went phone-free and said, wow, that was a mistake. Instead, they're all like, wow, we hear laughter in the hallways again. We hear laughter at lunch again. So 4 simple norms will solve this collective action problem. We can do these especially if we coordinate with the parents of our kids' friends, as long as you all do it. And it's so much more powerful if the school gives guidance. If, like, I don't know, if Vertex Academy, or if the schools that you run, if you could send a message home to the parents saying, parents, here's why we're doing this on phones. And I urge you, please don't give your child a smartphone before high school. Let's keep middle school clear of this. I don't know if you can say that to parents, but if you could, you've reset the norm right then and there. So, all right, thank you. So in conclusion, what I'm trying to tell you is that childhood has been rewired. It used to be play-based, which is healthy. Somehow we took our eye off the ball. We let it become phone-based. That was about 12 years ago. It's very new, just 12 years ago. We can undo it, and we have to undo it. We have overprotected our children in the real world and underprotected them online. Let's recognize our mistake and fix it. Thank you.
Thank you. Great. Thank you, Jonathan. That was exceptional. I'm very pleased to introduce Doug Lemov, who will do about 10 minutes worth of comments, then Graham, and then we'll actually have some questions. If you're watching online, you can email Emma, emma.brock, B-R-O-C-K, at aei.org. So we've already got a few questions coming in. So please send us your questions. And Doug, you're on.
Sure. Thanks, Ian.
Yep.
Great. Thank you, Ian, and thank you, Jonathan. That was fantastic. And interestingly, there will be some overlap, or would have been some overlap, between what I intended to talk about and what Jonathan talked about. So I will expedite and hit some maybe additional topics, and maybe talk a little bit about how this plays out for schools. I think one of the big conversations for those of us who work in schools over the last couple of years has been what the pandemic did to our organizations and did to kids and how devastating that's been. And I think one of the themes that I was thinking about while Jonathan was talking was that a lot of the things that we attribute to the pandemic are actually attributable to the epidemic, which is the smartphone. We've kind of mistaken the etiology, the thing that causes it. It's actually, it's the social media-based changes. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about a couple themes here. Maybe I'll spend a little bit of time talking about attention and its role in learning. Jonathan alluded to that, but it's really profoundly important for schools. I've got a little bit on mental health and belonging, and I'll probably go through that quickly and skip some of it because Jonathan did a better job than I could do of it. But then I also want to talk about what we do about it as institutions, because it's not sufficient just to restrict phones. One of the things we have to do is give students other things. Our goal in restricting phones is to build a place where students can thrive and learn, and just restricting phones alone won't do that. So I'll just share some examples, some schools that I visited of things that they're doing. So first of all, I think it's important to define the term attention. We use it kind of in lay terms, like, are you paying attention? But a cognitive psychologist would say that attention is maybe the fundamentally most important driver of learning. It's what you're concentrating on, your ability to sustain your focus on one topic and ignore other things. When I started dating my wife, just to go really old school in this, I didn't have a television at home, and so if we would go out to a bar or a restaurant or something and there was a television in the room, I would become unable to not stare at the television to the point where she would have to move me to another chair. Because my attention was, I wasn't able to selectively ignore the television, right? I wasn't able to ignore the screen. And so one thing that's important to recognize is that the quality of attention paid by learners is possibly the primary determinant of outcomes in almost every learning task. Want to read well? Like, one of the most important factors is your ability to sustain your concentration as you work down the page, as things come into your mind to potentially distract you when it's hard work. And P.S., if you're my son, when you're lying on the couch, on your back with your cell phone on your chest going bzz, 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 hey dude, guess what we're doing, right? Even if he manages to read the book, he's going to have a fundamentally different experience with that book than I had reading the same book 20 or 30 years ago when I was sort of lost in thought about why the cage bird sings or whatever else the book was. So attention is the fundamental driver of whether people learn in learning environments, and it's malleable. In other words, it can be increased or degraded. As I spent more time watching television, I got better at ignoring televisions in bars with my wife, happily. But one phrase you often hear among cognitive psychologists is, we wire how we fire, which means the way your brain is plastic, it's neuroplastic, so the way you use it shapes the way you can use it. Or maybe a more applied way of saying this is, the way you behave when you are on your device does not just shape what you do when you're on your device, it shapes what you do all the time. Because you spend so much time in that state that it starts to shape the way that your brain functions. Here's an example of this. This is research on task switching. This is 2 studies by a researcher whose name is Yaklis. And so in 2014, he studied undergraduates when they were working in a screened environment, laptop with internet on. And what he found was that they switched to a new task every 19 seconds. And that the switches were preceded by a 12-second period of increasing skin conductance. In other words, they're itching, well, even while they're looking at their, let's say, their notes that they're taking on their laptop from a class. They're itching to think about what's happening over there. Could I be doing some internet shopping right now? Was someone trying to message me? And so task switching every 19 seconds socializes your brain to constantly need and require a new task. It makes it harder and harder to sit still and read and focus for an hour at a time. By 2018, they logged all switches on personal computers used in natural environments and found that the median time before a switch occurred was 11 seconds. So when you're in an environment, when you have access to the wide world of screens, it's very hard to sustain your focus on a single learning task. And the result of this is that we wire ourselves to need this kind of constant new stimulation, and we're in this constant state of half attention. And this is true of us not just when we're on our phones, but essentially over time, at first it's the phone that distracts us. And interestingly, the research is really clear that even if your phone is turned over and it's sitting on a table in the room, you're still paying attention to it and you're thinking about, like, could there be anything on that right now? And it still disrupts your attention. But after a while, you don't even need the phone in the room for it to shape the way that your cognition works. It's a disruption, it's an attention disruption machine. Another example of this is something that cognitive scientists call attention residue, which if, let's say, you're trying to write a document on your laptop and you go to check your email, then you come back to your document, even after you've checked your email, part of your mind is still thinking about what was in that email, so you're not fully focused on the first task. And so if you're switching constantly, when you're doing your homework, when you're trying to engage in a learning task, you're never, again, really fully present. And this is powerful to think of given some of the data that Jonathan showed us, but here's the amount of time that the average US adolescent spends on a screen in an environment that is wiring them to be inattentive. If you have a 17-year-old, the average amount of time they probably spend in that environment is 5.8 hours a day, almost 6 hours a day. Right? That is basically what they do outside of school. They're being wired in their free time to struggle with attention in school. So allowing an attention fracturing device into an institution whose purpose relies on its ability to foster states of attention is highly counterproductive. And can I also say that schools are one of the last places in society where we could hope to build a buffer and offer young people an attention fostering safe space where they aren't constantly exposed to other people's phones, where we all make this collective agreement that there are not going to be phones. And I think that that's a gift to young people that they deserve. By the way, just worth thinking about this as educators, here's what the cell phone has done to independent reading among students, right? This data actually ends in 2016, before the pandemic and before megadoses of social media that came with it, and before the sort of latest generation of those most powerful social media tools like TikTok. But even then, in the 1970s and 80s, 60 to 70% of kids read independently for pleasure almost every day, and those numbers are down to about 10% now. Jonathan crushed the discussion of the effects of cell phones on mental health and belonging, but obviously a key part of what we do when we build great schools is we want students to feel belonging, so they want to come to school and they feel part of the institution and so they feel like it is a place for them. And anytime I look at data sets, I just try and superimpose these two lines over them. The first one is I always drop a line down at 2011. Because 2011 is the year when the like button was invented. And the like button is a tool that adapts and exploits variable, unpredictable reinforcement, which basically says when you post something and you start to worry, will anyone like it? And it's unpredictable and you're not sure, it causes you to go back to it and back to it and back to it and obsess on it. And this is the point where we start to see these points of inflection that Jonathan was talking about. And then somewhere around 2016, the cell phone became universal. I know this because I was a parent at this point, and my goal was to be the very last parent who gave their kid a cell phone. But at some point, it's really, really hard when all your, you've probably gone through this, all your kids' friends, no one is going to call them on their landline to say, hey, we're all getting together at Mary's house, right? You either have a cell phone and you're part of social connection, or you're not. And so this universalization line, if you take these lines and you superimpose them on the kinds of data that Jonathan showed us, right, the spike starts when the like button comes around, and when universalization rolls around, the things get really serious. And similar point, even when kids are together, social contact is so important. I was going to talk a little bit about just the powerful importance of human eye contact. It tells us one of the most important ways that we tell that we belong when we're in a group of people. So much less eye contact now among young people, right? So they aren't, even when they're together, they're often looking down at their phones. One young woman that I interviewed for my book said, she was describing the first day back to school after the pandemic, and she said, I walked down the hallway, and I think she said all my friends were there, and I was so excited to see them, and they were all looking down at their phones, and I was like, well, why did I even bother to come back to school? Why didn't I just stay at home and do lessons on my computer via Zoom? So what do we do about it? I want to talk a little bit about antidotes because I think, again, the purpose is to restrict cell phones in order to build spaces that maximize learning and thriving, right? The former does not guarantee the latter. It helps, but it's not going to be enough. One really interesting piece of data from Jean Twenge's outstanding book, iGen, is that this is data on things that influence the risk of teenagers being unhappy. And as you can see at the bottom, internet and social networking websites are highly likely to cause students to be unhappy. But sports or exercise and religious services and in-person social interactions actually have a counter effect, right? So if we can cause students to be more socially connected, my kids play soccer, and when they go to play soccer 3 times a week, they spend 90 minutes nowhere near their cell phone, looking people in the eye in a collective endeavor where they're working together on things. That is healthy for them. So, some school-based antidotes. These are just some pictures from schools that I've worked with. My daughter's school banned cell phones. They went with Yonder pouches. It was fantastic. One of the other things that they did in addition to the restrictions was they put decks of Uno cards on the tables in the library and in the lunchroom because it caused students to then reconnect and not just sit there and be like, what should I do? Their social skills have atrophied because they live in isolation. It created opportunities for them to rebuild and reconstruct their social connections and their social skills. Similarly, a school that I know in Nashville, they have a really good basketball team. Most kids get cut from the basketball team, but they fairly brilliantly tripled the length of basketball tryouts so the kids felt like, even the kids who got cut felt like I was part of the team for a while, I connected. And so like schools just thinking through more intentionally the opportunities for participation. This same school, there's an image of cheerleaders here. They tried to engineer the environment at games so that it felt like an NCAA environment. They like threw t-shirts and so the kids wanted to come to the game so it felt more special and they felt more connected to school. So they also suggested that like when it's game day for the basketball team, everyone wears their t-shirt, and like, so why don't we have t-shirts for the debate team? So every way that kids get involved feels as meaningful and special to them. So there are things that schools can be doing to not just restrict, but to build antidotes. And I'd also like to say that for parents, as a parent, I'll share with you my list of the things that I did for my kids. The one thing I think it's most important is your phone does not live in your room at night, period, end of story. This is a big battle. With my kids, they did not like it, though I interviewed them later on a podcast and they are glad that I did it. But the time when a cell phone is most dangerous is at night when you're alone in your room. Your phone does not sleep. Your phone does not sleep in your room at night. Our rule was not past 10 o'clock. It could be 9. It could be 8, etc. I think it's also important for families to have times when there are no cell phones. So like at dinner for us, there's never a cell phone. Like that's a rule and an expectation. Again, I'm trying to create spaces that are antidotes. One other thing that I do academically is I always have my kids, they have to march into their teacher and ask for the textbook in hard copy. Because if they don't, and the textbook is online, it means when they come home and they start their homework, they flip open their laptop, and then they flip open their phone because they have to text someone about what's on the laptop. And so they're the one kid who's like, my dad says, can I have a copy of the textbook in hard copy? But then they're home, and I'm like, great, you can read chapter 10 right now, sit on the couch, put your phone away, put some music on, relax. But it's a great way to help kids get their work done. I think schools unintentionally sometimes socialize more screen time than they need to. Great, so the key point here is that the restrictions will be less effective without antidotes, that buy-in from skeptical parents is an outcome, not a precondition, right? If we can change productively and successfully the lives of how students feel in school, then the parents will, then the parents will be bought in, and if we don't do those things, then the parents will be skeptical. So thank you for the opportunity to chat with you about that. I'll leave it there. I'm sure Graham will have even more useful and powerful things to say, so let me pass it off to Antoinette.
Thank you, Doug. Graham, come on up. The point about having empowering alternatives, or what Doug calls an antidote, is so important. And now let's hear from Graham, who actually founded a company to address these issues. And then we'll have a little Q&A as well.
Okay, I'll be very brief today. Thank you, Ian, for having me. I'm happy to be here. It might be helpful to understand a little bit of where Yonder came from, because times have changed so much. I started the company 10 years ago, so in 2014. I was in San Francisco at the time. It was kind of in the belly of the tech beast. And the zeitgeist at the time was very different than it is now. There was this promise that more technology was going to open limitless possibilities. It was going to take us here, do this. Everything was going to be more connected everywhere all the time. And my perception at the time and my perception now is that I don't believe that's right. I think that my belief then is that we are going to need to carve out spaces in modern society where the things that happen there stay there, where things like learning, where participation in the creative acts and art can flourish, because there's an aspect of technology, not just phones, that has a way of running roughshod over these finer activities that are the things that deep down, I think, actually sustain us as people and as society. And so in 2014, that's what I set out to do, was to create a structure where the pillars of our company would be around education and live performance. And I did that for a reason. Is to protect artists and to create a space where people could be swept up into a shared mood, the things that bind society together in those experiences. And then for students, because I thought that the experience of being a young person walking through the world with a smartphone in your pocket, people did not understand yet the unanticipated effects that was going to have. And like everything related to technology, my perception is that it mostly represents a path of least resistance, and that's what's harming kids. What we found over time as the company's grown, and we work with now thousands of schools all around the world in 21 countries, is that when you actually create a space, you create the environment that's phone-free, and you do it in a constructive way, that we're not punishing students. The things that we are used to seeing in our childhood, or my childhood, come back very quickly. So Doug talked about Uno, or kids playing games, or library books being checked out. It doesn't take that much, but it is bound, I believe, to physical space to create habits that are constructive. It was very important to let kids know and in communities, and this is what we do as a company, is get people to understand that all the things they're worried about, the way their kid is growing up with unfettered access to the internet, whether that's pornography or that's distractions or it's what it's doing to them socially, schools can take a concrete, constructive approach to solve the question 8 hours a day. So what we hear from parents, and especially teachers, obviously, and we've worked with teachers for 10 years, a lot of parents will say that once their child starts going to a school that uses Yonder, when they go home, they start to see the phone migrate away from their body. And it makes sense. You started to break the physical impulse. That's what binds them to it, and Doug spoke to that. And that's our goal, because we're not going to be able to shepherd kids through life, young adults. That's not the point. The point is to teach them. But to teach them, you have to first give them the experience of being outside it enough to have perspective on what social media or the internet is doing to the way they think, to their social interactions, to fights being orchestrated. That's, I believe, the way it works at a practical, fundamental level. At the moment, we're very excited because there's legislation moving all around the world, but especially in the United States. There's talks about banning phones. I think as a group, as a team, in our company, what we've learned is you have to get buy-in from everyone involved. You have to go in. It's a community's problem to solve. Yonder, as a company, we're a facilitator. We're there to help create the space for the people who want to do it. And then I would say it's very, very important, as much as possible, to let students know that this is not a punishment. I think there's an overwhelming kind of nihilist feeling growing amongst young people. And my goal is that they get a sense when they go into a phone-free school or they go into a phone-free show that there's a genuine sense of freedom and possibility, and that their primary interactions with the world and that sense of discovery or play is what actually builds character. It's what builds their identity in the world, rather than constructing an identity and projecting it outside of themselves to see what the world spits back at you. And to me, it does not just affect young people, it affects adults. It's a thing that's happening everywhere. But the goal is to take a practical approach. And one thing that's very inspiring to me is I've been fortunate to work with educators for 10 years everywhere and artists all around the world. And there is a large group of people who care about the issue and are trying to solve it. And it's happening in individual families and in the classroom. And we're seeing really positive results. And the results in schools in particular are very dramatic. So I'll cut it there. I'm happy to answer questions. But thank you again for having me in. I'm thrilled.
Okay, before we have Lynn Turnbull come on, I just want to pose one question to the group, which is that obviously we've talked a lot about the relationship to cell phones and these deleterious impacts on mental health, academic outcomes. Are there any appropriate roles during the school day? You might have educators that say, you know, cell phones can offer during science class precision measuring in a way that we couldn't do it in the past, and so there might be a justifiable reason. So curious for folks who might be listening to say, I get it, but is there any way in which you should find ways to integrate cell phone use during class? And this is completely different from out of classroom time, but in class. Any responses?
Well, I would say, in theory, there certainly are all kinds of positive roles that these devices can play in instruction. But in practice, the lure to connect, to text, to check is so strong that the distraction is generally going to outweigh the benefits. And I'm very confident about that for elementary and middle school. I think we need to just have a very clear rule. We take this stuff out of the kids' lives. Of course, they'll have access to the internet. There'll be times when they be on a computer. But if they have their own personal device, they're going to be texting. They can't help it. In high school, maybe someone could make an argument that the benefits are so amazing compared to not having it, but I'm a little skeptical.
Doug or Graham?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are some isolated examples. I think going on the internet to retrieve information in general as a mode of learning is very different than going to the library and building a structure of knowledge around a subject. So in my opinion on the internet in general is once you're in the pool, you get wet. There's no deeper shallow. Yeah.
once you're in the pool, you get wet. Well, one of the great things about these kinds of conversations is they're not just theoretical. And we have someone, James Turnbull, who's the founder of New Pathways Academy Middle School, but even before then, had a long tenure in a high school. And so has a lot of experience actually implementing policies like this. So, Lynn.
Good night, everyone. Thank you for having me. I'm just going to talk a little bit about my journey coming from, I've been in education for over 20 plus years. My entirety of my education journey has been here in the Bronx. It's been a privilege serving families in the Bronx from middle school, high school. And so I've served in pretty much every role. I've been a teacher, I've been an assistant principal, a mom, a guidance counselor, or everything that comes with being an educator in a school. And I have children of my own. I have 3 adult children. They're 27, 26, and 24 years old. So I too have gone through that journey of putting a cell phone in a child's hand. So when I started my cell phone free journey, I came from a high school, middle school, high school, that we had a you see it, you take it policy, right? And so if we saw it, we would take the cell phone and then a parent would retrieve it, or we would give the kid back their phone at the end of the day. And so that came with a lot of issues, right? And so we're talking about practical, on the ground, absent of the data. We see all the data coming into the things that we do. Kids were texting each other in the daytime. Come to the bathroom, we're doing this, you know, meet me after school in this place. We are doing, you know, this teacher's class is boring today, so let's cut out. That's what's happening, and I think it's still happening in places that have the cell phone. And so when I had the great opportunity, a blessed opportunity to open my own school, I decided I did not want to go in with that philosophy, and I wanted to do total cell phone free. And so it was quite a challenge as well, going from the high school perspective into the middle school. My school is a small 6 through 8 school. It's a public school in District 9. And one of the things that happened when I opened the small school is I opened with brand new teachers. Myself was a brand new principal, and I had the kids from the closing school. And so all the kids from the closing school were using their cell phones. This was what the school before me did, and now this lady coming in, and she don't know what she's talking about, and we need to have our phones, we need to call our mothers and our parents to tell them this is happening, and then this lady is telling us we can't have phones. And so I heard a little bit about those policies and that partnership, and I really had to partner with parents. I really had to have kids understand why we were taking the phone away within that time frame that they were in school. And I had to build on my teachers' capacity to really buy into that as well, so that they can see the benefit of the child not having the phone in front of them. So it's very important as a school, if you're going on this journey, that all stakeholders in your school is on board. But most importantly, the children understand why you're doing it. Because what eventually happened over the years is that the children were the ones telling their parents, I can't use my phone in school. So when the parent is texting the child and saying, you ain't answer your phone all day, I've been calling you, the child is now saying to the parent, we're not allowed to have our phone, stop calling me, Ma. Like, you know, and so those things were now in place where the children are understanding how hurtful, and I'm gonna use a word that people are probably not gonna be comfortable with, I didn't mention earlier, but sometimes that cell phone can be a weapon to some children. And we have, you know, we saw the data on girls, and girls are more susceptible to those things. When you put a picture out there of a young lady in her nakedness, and that gets out there, that becomes something that she has to live with for years to come. Because as we know in the internet, things don't ever disappear. It's always there. It doesn't come down. You know, they say it comes down, but it's always there. And so our children have to face that all the time, and it becomes something that that can have psychological damage and leads to those numbers that you saw earlier that Jonathan shared around depression, mental health, and then you have another thing to deal with in the school. And then it brings me to my teachers, right? So you have teachers in the classroom trying to teach a quadratic equation, And if it takes 19 seconds to switch from one thing to the next, I'm not doing that quadratic equation in 19 seconds because I'm thinking about something else, and I'm thinking about something else. I need the time to read a document-based question. I need the time to read an English language prompt. I need the time to read 2 articles and go back and forth between 2 articles to come up with an argument or a persuasive essay. And if it's 19 seconds and I need to do the next thing, I ain't thinking about pros and cons of anything else but the next like I'm gonna get, right? And so that's one of the reasons why children are starting to understand why we pull away from them having the cell phone in the classroom. My first year was a bit of a challenge trying to get that through to the children, and so you have to put things in place. You have to delve into cell phone-free activities with the children in advisory. You have to talk about the social emotional impact it's gonna have on them. You can't just do something with children and not explain to them why. You have to survey them. You have to ask them how they're feeling about the certain thing that's now being taken away. And yes, we created spaces. Once we took the cell phone away, we created spaces where they can now play, right? We have open gym. When we have our dances, that's a place where the kids can use their cell phones, and they ask us, can we use our phone during the dance today? Yes, you can, because all day, you are not able to use your cell phone. When it's recess time, it's time for playing. We don't let them use their phone during recess. We want to see them play. We want to see them engage with one another. We want to see a boy ask a girl, you know, you look cute today. That's what we want them to do. We don't want them to be sending it over the cell phone. We want for children, whether it's a boy and a girl, and a girl and a girl, boy and a boy, it doesn't matter, right? As long as those things that children are able to then with one another interact, speak to each other, socialize with one another, have a conversation, and even beyond have a conversation, yes, have an argument, right? Problem solve, and do those things together, one-on-one, and look at each other in the eyes. I can't begin to tell you how many times I go to dinner somewhere, and everybody at the dinner table, their face is in a cell phone. It's tough. And, you know, parents and the adults in the room, we are not free from that. We are just as guilty, okay? We are just as guilty. We are just as guilty. So we also need to model that. Stop, you know, those things that I saw earlier today is the things that I say to my parents. Take the phone away at 8 p.m. Don't let them go to sleep with the phone in the room. You have to come up with some structures, and let's have some backbone as parents. I'm sorry to say that. Let's do that. It's okay that your child is upset at you. You're not your child's friend. You are the parent until they get to a certain age where now you can have friendship conversations, right? And so let's make sure that we do that with our kids. Let's make sure that we give them the opportunity to be children, to play. I always tell people that come to my school, the #1 sign I look for in my children to see they're happy in my hallway is a child skipping down the hallway. Seriously, a child skipping down the hallway tells me my children in my school, they are happy. They feel free. They are cell phone free. They feel free to be kids. They're not in anxiety mode that they walk into a bathroom and somebody has a cell phone on them. They're not in anxiety mode when they're in crisis, in some sort of crisis, and they're having a tantrum that somebody's videotaping them and then gonna put it on social media later. Like, they get to be kids, and we get to protect them in that moment until they leave the building, right? And so once they do leave the building, that's on you, parents. Now it's your job, right? Take away the phone in the evening. Make sure that you are following up and you are checking your children's phone. You pay for it. You don't want paying the bill. I promise you, none of you children here are paying your own bill. Parents, you're paying the bill. You should know what's happening on the phone. You should be checking the phone very regularly. You should know your children's passcode. Don't leave it up to them. They don't need to have so much privacy, and they're so young. They are not adults. So let's take some responsibility back as parents as well. If the schools are providing that cell phone-free zone, when they get home, you also manage that cell phone. We're not saying don't give it to them. We're not saying don't, let them have a cell phone. We're not saying any of those things. What we're saying is you gotta manage it, because that cell phone gives them access to the world, not the Bronx, the world. And so that's who's teaching your children now. So I need you to be a parent and ensure that you are also parenting your children and not the world that's parenting them. So that's my 2-piece.
take a seat. Take a seat up there. Yes, Lynn, you're amazing, incredible. So why don't we open it up for questions? We have a bunch of questions from online, but and I think there's going to be. Yep.
Thank you. Thanks.
Hello. Thank you, Ian, for hosting this event. Good to see you. Thank you, everybody, for sharing your valuable research and insight into these topics, important topics. I'm a young educator myself. I'm 26 years old, primarily a choral and band director, music director, teaching all the way from 4th grade to college. And one of the biggest challenges I faced, and I wonder if this is a common experience for other educators in the room, is among my students, lack of consistent attendance, lack of commitment to showing up to class and clearly communicating conflicts in advance, just a general lack of desire to participate and make an effort in class. I wonder if you have any insight into the causes of that based on your research related to social media use, cell phone usage, and any roadmaps for educators on how to solve these practically and at scale. Thank you.
This may not necessarily be the answer, but on the ground in the classroom, the kids are up all night on the cell phone. So mom and dad goes to bed, the cell phone comes out, lights are off, and they're up all night chatting with their friends. By the time they get to school to you in the morning, they're exhausted, right? And so they're disengaged because of something that may have happened overnight. We're not ever sure what it is. But I also come back to the second part of that, is as educators, yes, we're fighting this fight with the cell phone, with the internet and all of that. So we need to think about clever and more engaging ways in the classroom to engage our students, because they are this generation of flashing lights and so forth. And so sometimes that lesson in social studies may not pull them in as much. We need to get them out their seats. We need to give them more discussion. We need to give them an opportunity to debate amongst each other. So part of it does fall a little bit on the classroom teacher, and it's a difficult thing because that's what you're competing with. I'm not sure if I have the answer completely, but we can definitely explore those things. And again, I come back to parents. You gotta take away the phone at night and don't allow the kids to be on the phone all night, because they can't perform the following day and come to school, you know, focused and ready to learn because they're exhausted.
It's a great question, and I would say that what you're describing, lack of attendance, actual and psychological, are both symptom and cause at the same time. And this is going to seem like a little bit of a digression, but my daughter's school restricted cell phones. They used yonder pouches, and she, when it first happened, she was pretty sure that I was behind it. So there were some tense times at home. She wasn't happy. She was really mad. She's lovely, but she was really mad. And after the first week, she came to me and she said, "Dad, I'm going to tell you something, and you have to promise to not go all dad on this," which I think meant you have to promise never to refer to this conversation again. What she said was, "I'm stunned by how happy I am at school." You know, her description was, "I can't believe how much more enjoyable it is to be with my friends and how much less I have to worry about when I'm not thinking about my phone all day." And I think that tells us that kids don't always know what will make them happy. That if we build environments that make them happy, if you're a music teacher, if you can be really intentional about building a place where kids feel connected to other kids, it will surprise them. They'll be connected back to oh, actually, this is a place that I really want to be. I want to be in, either I want to be in school or I want to be in school because I would love to be in music class or music club. So I think just intentionality about constructing the environments that students experience when they're not on their phone. I think that there's this counterbalance. We have to show them there's something better. I think Graham used the phrase that we have to carve out spaces. So I think it's only part of the solution because we're still battling the phone, but starting out really carving those intentional spaces that make kids feel really special. I think we can still do that.
Hi, Miles Mendoza, thank you so much for hosting and having a great event. I've worked in education reform for a long time, and it's usually really hard to find an issue that you can agree on with the teachers' unions. It seems like this could be one of those.
Yeah.
But in contrast, big tech makes big tobacco look like a lightweight. What's the challenge there? What's been your experience when you're taking away their pipeline of customers? What's been the reaction?
Yeah. I don't know. I mean,
Well, I mean, so far, I mean, I've thought about this, like, am I gonna, like, disappear in the night for writing a book that's accusing these companies of everything? And I realized, like, no, thank God I don't live in Russia. Thank God I live in the United States, where all the tech companies do is buy off the Congress and the state legislators and the media and the lawyers. So I don't know that the tech companies are so Machiavellian that they're, like, gonna come after anyone. They're thinking systemically, and they know exactly. I mean, they're really abstract systems thinkers. That's how they built these amazing systems. So I don't get any sense that they're, gonna really, interfere with what we're doing in our schools. They're focused on legislation, and they're really focused now on the court cases, because if they lose, if any parent succeeds in saying my kid is dead because of you and you are liable, that's going to open the floodgates to a settlement vastly larger than the tobacco settlement.
Hi, just to pick up on what Miles said, what is the reaction from the teachers union? Are they likely allies in this cause?
I don't know what the reaction of the teachers union is, but what I often hear people say about cell phones in schools, a sort of counter argument, is why don't we teach kids how to manage the technology? They're going to have it for the rest of their lives. Why don't we just teach them in schools how to manage that? Which I think is a wildly unrealistic ask of teachers who are already overwhelmed, trying to do 10,000 other things, including teaching reading and math. And the notion that relatively untrained people are going to stand up in front of the room and via a few pithy aphorisms say, hey kids, manage your cell phone. They're going to unwind this sort of social addiction. It's such an unreasonable ask of teachers who already need less on their plates that, to me, it's a no-brainer that teaching associations and unions should be behind this idea that there's an opportunity here to protect teachers so they can do their job, which is teaching, and not ask them to mitigate all social ills. That's a great question.
No, I'm pretty
I
sure
couldn't speak to that.
I'm pretty sure that they made a statement supporting phone-free schools. So yeah, they really are public on this.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add, again, separate of the unions, is that to me, in 10 years, the experience I've had with teachers is they usually fall in one of two camps with phones. Either they view the problem as so huge and overwhelming that it can't even be tackled, or they view it as a huge, I don't know what's happening there. Or they view it as a huge, overwhelming problem, and they're looking for a way to tackle it. So our approach to that has been to try to, might need to switch.
There we have it. It is the cell phone is interrupting the signal.
It was a cell phone problem. It's all right. And I totally agree with Doug that the answer can't be put more on the teachers. So the approach has been to say, do something that does not ask them to be the phone police and play whack-a-mole all day fighting with the student over that power struggle, and there's so much wrapped up in it psychologically. And what we hear from a lot of schools that work with us has been that teacher retention improves because the actual structure of the environment is so much better. They're not doing 5 different jobs, they're focused on teaching. And also, it creates a structure in their interaction with students that I've heard can be transformative.
That literally was a question that came in. Is there any data on teacher retention for cell phone free schools? One of the questions that came in, one of the modern day issues that many parents seem to worry about is the terrible scenario of an active shooter. You've got your kids in school. And so parents, even though they may believe all this research and they see the connection to mental health issues, they say, but in that moment, I want to be able to access my kid. What do you say to those parents in those situations?
Yeah, that is pretty much the only counter-argument to a phone-free school, and it's a really bad counter-argument. Because I want you to just consider, you can send your kid to one of two middle schools. In middle school number 1, everyone has a phone in their pocket. In middle school 2, everyone has a phone in their yonder pouch or in a phone locker. And let's suppose something really happens. Let's suppose there actually is a shooter. Do you want to be in the school where everyone is on their phone calling their mom and crying? Or do you want to be on the phone in the school, you want your kid in the school where the teacher is the one with the phone, she or he is coordinating, the kids are doing what they're supposed to do, they're paying attention, they can move quickly, and they're not, and they're quiet, they're not making all this noise. So I quote, there's one expert on school security, his last name is Trump, he's quoted as saying that kids are much safer in that situation if they're listening and following directions than if they're on their phones.
And just to add, we're trained for the kids to be quiet during that moment. So when we do our emergency drills, we don't want to have kids on the phone. We want kids paying attention to what's happening in the moment, that this, whatever drill it is, or if it's happening for real, that they're following the directives of who is in the room with them, and not the parent on the phone who's frantic that can't even see what's happening in the room with them.
No, this is a hugely important point. In those moments, you want authorities from the police or the administration dictating what should be happening, not individual kids. And we had a question here. Oh, 2.
Thank you. I think all of this is great. And I just want to add a wrinkle. I know that social media is far worse than what I'm going to bring up. But if we talk about it, and the research shows the danger of the screen time, too much time, 9 hours, how does that, what are your thoughts on that measured with the devices in the classroom and all the schools going to giving everyone a device and they're spending time on a device, both at home and even learning time, but it's still cumulative time on a device?
I'll start off by saying, so I'm not an expert yet in educational technology. I've been focused on the phones and the stuff at home, and I don't fully understand the degree to which Chromebooks and everything else is used in school. It's not that screens themselves are bad and we shouldn't let kids look at screens. It's the distraction from what they're supposed to be doing or what you're trying to do with them. And so I can see a role for screens in the classroom, but when it's your personal one that you can use to text, this is the critical thing. The kids must not have any way to text ever during the day, or they will. And if anyone is texting, then everyone has to check. So I can't say you need to get rid of all of it, but is it the case that when the kids are given Chromebooks, they actually have personalized it, they have their email or their texting on that device? I'll also add, so you're nodding yes, so that I think is probably going to be really bad. Also, a report came out about a year ago from UNESCO, United Nations Educational, and it was a big report. I haven't read it all, but the bottom line covered in newspapers was they said there really isn't any evidence that all this technology is helping anybody in school. And the fact that the founders of this technology mostly send their kids to the Waldorf school, the guys who created this stuff didn't let their kids have it, and they sent their kids to a tech-free school. Another really important point, we thought in the 90s and 2000s that there was a digital divide. We thought, oh my God, all these rich kids, they've got computers, they've got internet, and the poor kids don't. We have to get computers to everybody. We have to get computers, an individual device to everyone. We have to focus on lower income kids. Well, guess what? It wasn't very helpful to have them. And now the digital divide is that kids who are in a more upper class family, who have 2 married parents, they have some constraints in their life. They have a lot more constraint. They spend a lot less time on their devices. Kids from poor families, single parent families, also African Americans and Latinos compared to whites, they're spending a lot more time. So the digital divide is not about access to the internet, it's now about protection from it.
Wow, powerful stuff. Fair question.
Ryan Badalato, a teacher at Vertex, and have been teaching at schools that use Yonder pouches for the past 3 years, and it's really been a godsend. I think companies and entrepreneurs that are taking on this role are doing a a great duty to our country, but I guess my question's around the role of social media companies, which we talk about often as whether they're platforms or publishers. Once our kids leave school, they have access to this, unfettered access. What responsibility do you think social media companies have in limiting what kids under 18 can see, if there is any responsibility for them?
Most of the attention is on content moderation. Can't we clean it up? And we saw that in the Senate hearings. But Senator, we spend, $50 billion. We've removed 7 trillion pieces of pornography. We're good. But this actually goes back to the debates around television, when television came in. And the great media theorists of the 20th century, like Marshall McLuhan and Neil Postman, they said, don't focus on the content. Even if you clean up the content on Instagram, even if girls are only seeing lovely pictures of other girls all day long, that's going to be devastating. The medium is the message. The medium is the problem. If childhood is not about playing and talking and looking, but about swiping, 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 if that's all you do all day long, it doesn't matter if you clean up the content. Now, of course you need to clean up the content. Please, let's not have drug dealers and prostitutes talking to our 12-year-olds. So they have to do that. But I think we have to recognize this is not primarily about the content. It's about the nature of childhood and protecting children from it, at least until their brains get most of the way through puberty. We've got to recognize puberty is this period when the brain is rapidly rewiring. And I think you said something like, who's going to guide him? Oh, strangers on the internet. Let's have strangers on the internet guide our kids as their brains rewire. No, let's not do that.
And as a related question, some, again, parents, some pushback, they say, similar to Ryan, at some point our kids are going to have to manage themselves in college. So what should we be doing? Is it the right thing in high school, for example, to restrict, or is that the best strategy to help kids develop the self-restraint, self-regulation skills? Some folks disagree on that particular point.
The best way to help them develop self-regulation skills is to keep them away from distraction devices while the parts of the frontal cortex that do executive control are wiring up. You are not going to let kids practice self-control on a device when they're 12, 13, 14, starting puberty. If we keep our kids off until at least 16, they are at no disadvantage compared to kids who are on since they were 12. You can learn this stuff in a week or two. It's not like you need a running start. Same thing with sex, heroin, and gambling. We don't have to start our kids at age 12. They can learn it when they're 18.
Okay.
Hi, my name's Mitch, and I also teach here at Vertex. I remember a number of years ago when Rock Guitar, the video game, came out, and one of my weird thoughts and reaction to that video game was, why would anyone waste hours on end learning to play a video game version of guitar when they could spend hours on end actually playing a guitar and be like the next Jimmy Page or something cool in real life? And related to that, it's just catastrophic and tragic how social media, its effects that were displayed in the statistics on young girls. But with boys in particular, I always worry and think about how much my grandfather knew how to do, all the different skills and things he could practically do that were so heroic, and the things that my father knows how to do that are wonderful and heroic, and the things that I don't know how to do. Because I came up in a generation of young men engaging in video games, engaging in a whole nother type of thing. Another thing that I noticed about 8 years ago was, for the first time ever, I saw students would sit in a room on a computer and they'd watch YouTube videos of other people playing video games. So there was a whole other layer then that had developed. So are we moving towards a point where, I think a lot of times people like to think, oh, it's cool, I could do anything because I have this phone in my pocket, I can just YouTube it. But we don't actually have the skill sets that we need to function in real life. I mean, is there data and things to talk about this or discuss this?
Yeah, I can, well, I'd love to hear. I'll start a little bit in terms of that idea you just described. There's a philosopher in Montana, and he calls these things focal events, things that wrap up your entire body and mind in skillful participation in the act, like you described, working on something, playing music, hiking. But each of those activities require a push over a hump to engage in them. And when you have technology on the other side, in the package of a smartphone or something, it's kind of gives you the salt and the fat of those interactions without the meat and potatoes of it. And but it's so titillating, and it's a slide in and down. And I think that's what it brings in. When I said carving out these spaces, that's the effect it has, is it kind of encourages you to titillation and simulation. And I think you can look at that in other cultures, in a place like Japan, where there's, in young men in particular, there is a lot of simulation. There's a lot of people living out their hero journey through the phone, in a video game, rather than going out and participating because it's just harder. But I think the encouraging thing is, as Doug was talking about rewiring the brain, I think the more you practice the facility of participation and being in it and other people around you, the more native that becomes. So I think it is a muscle that can be developed, but technology is so strong a lure that it kind of has to be separated, is my opinion. Sorry.
That's great. No, I think I just agree. I think it's a fascinating question. Why would you rather spend your time playing Guitar Hero than playing guitar? And I think it's cleverly engineered to reduce the barrier to mastery, right? The struggle of like your first weeks on guitar is like so much. It's designed to be easy, and people are, when you are particularly adverse to persistence because your attention is fractured, I think you're especially prone to that kind of like setting of like, persist for 3 weeks learning to play a chord. Why would I do that when I can do something gratifying tomorrow? So I think it's another argument for socializing, for exposing young people to environments that reward persistence and long-term investment in learning things, as opposed to the constant short-term reinforcing an instant reward. I think maybe that's what's behind it.
And I would just like to add just a little bit on this, because it's very important to have a question about boys. So do you have shop class at Vertex Academy?
We will.
Good. There you go. So there's a wonderful book by Richard Reeves called Of Boys and Men. And what Richard points out is boys need more running around, recess, physical stuff. Boys need shop class. Boys want to make things. Boys are more oriented towards the physical world. They grow up and read Popular Mechanics. Girls are more oriented towards people, the social world. They grow up and read People magazine. These gender differences are very consistent across life. But school has moved ever further away from the physical world. They don't learn anything physical. And what Richard has shown is that especially the sex difference in achievement for wealthy kids is not that big. Boys in wealthy families are actually doing almost as well as girls. But as you go down the ladder towards lower SES, you get a huge gap where the boys are dropping out in huge numbers compared to the girls. And a way to get them back, Richard says, give them shop class, give them a path to vocational education, and the boys are going to benefit from those more than the girls, which will help reduce some of the gender inequality that we have in schools.
We are almost out of time, so we'll take a couple more questions. I did want to pose a question for Lynn, because you very emphatically, and I'll come back to you, talked about the role of parents. What can we do to help parents not only be good role models for their kids, but to actually change their behavior, because they're not in school all day. So we can't just have cell phone-free workplaces. What are the tools to help grown-ups address our addiction?
I think it's about how we educate parents. We have to think about, I'm almost 50, and we have parents who are very young, and they're coming from that age where they also have been drawn in with the cell phone, and so we have to rewire their brains, right? And that takes education, and it's hard to tell someone you need to be educated to be a parent. It's not something that we go out and recruit people to do that, right? It just happens. When you become a parent, you are in it and you're learning as you go. But we're in a time where educating parents to be parents is super important. And like I said earlier, you have to be in a place where you have to be the parent. You are not your child's friend. And I think that message has to go through with especially my younger parents, because I have parents who show up and they're in their mid-30s and they have a child that's 15, and you see this dynamic where the 15-year-old is almost parenting the 35-year-old. And so parents need to be educated. Parents need to understand. One of the things I do at my school is I have an IT tech, a specialist. He does trainings for our parents around all the apps and tools that the parents can use to monitor their children. We don't necessarily have to take the phone from them, but there's also things through technology where you can use to monitor your children online. And so we give the parents those tools. You know, helping parents to understand what's out there on the internet, because your children know so much more than you do about the cell phone. We are constantly in our classrooms, we have Chromebooks. To that gentleman's question, we do have Chromebooks. We don't use them all the time. They're used for specific things in specific lessons. I am pushing for my teachers to do a lot more pen and paper, reading pen and paper, working out a math problem on pen and paper, and you know, the city's moving towards digital tests and things like that. And so it counteracts some of the things that we're doing in schools, because we want kids to be able to like hold a pencil, right? Hold a pencil and do that. Flip a page in a book. And it sounds like we're going backwards, but we really aren't, right? We need for kids to be able to do that, and we need for parents to be able to have our backs in schools when we say this policy is going to help your child. And if you want to come into a school where we can educate you on certain workshops and programs and dealing with your child who wants to be on social media all night, we can help you to do that, but you have to be open in order to say, I need help as a parent to deal with this issue.
Thank you. All right, so we'll have one more question. Please each of you just think about a 30-second closing statement. And we had one more question, and then delicious food awaits all of you.
Hi, my name is Jay. How are you? I'm a parent. I would have to say that I have an 8-year-old who goes to charter school, and I noticed that at home she was getting attached to the computer. So what I did is I totally took it away for several months, and I noticed a difference in her behavior. She's excelling in school. She's a straight A student. She's also teaching, 8 years old. I agree with that this hand device is a help, but it's a hindrance. It's a monster. That's the only way I can put it. And there are parents that are complaining. I was on the bus the other day, and I saw a little girl. She was like maybe first grade. And I noticed that she kept asking the mother over and over, can I use the computer on the bus? She kept going over and over and over, and she wouldn't stop. And you can tell the mother was getting very frustrated. And she was like kindergarten and already extremely attached to the phone. So this is a major problem, and I just want to tell you thank you for bringing up these issues, because this has to be dealt with.
Thank you. So I'd love for each of you, just 30 seconds, any final parting thoughts to education leaders, policymakers, parents. What's the final takeaway?
I think I said this earlier, like, let's let our children be children. Let's bring back happiness and giggles and laughing and skipping and playing and all of that wonderful stuff. I think we miss that, and we had that when we were children. So let's come back to that.
Love it.
And I guess in my closing statement, I'd say, even though a lot of the data I presented seems very depressing about what's happening to Gen Z, I am wildly optimistic that we're going to fix this by the end of 2025. The reason I say that is because it's a few simple norms. We don't have to really persuade very many people. The parents largely hate what's going on. All the teachers hate it. The heads of school hate it. The psychologists and psychiatrists hate it. So once we see it as a collective action problem, we embrace a few norms. These norms cost nothing to implement. There's no harm, even if I'm wrong about this. It doesn't hurt to let kids play more. So this is a very big problem, which is amazingly solvable, and I think we're actually going to solve it within a year and a half, at least get the new norms in place.
That's really gratifying to hear a note of optimism at the end of the discussion. Actually, just to go worm's eye view, I was thinking about your question about how to help parents, because I'm so keenly aware that I'm addicted while I'm trying to manage my own children's lives with it. And I think there are actually a fair number of tools that can help out there. People often want to change, but they lack the willpower to. I would love to drop 20 pounds. I'm really motivated to change, but I lack the willpower. But there are lots of tools out there that can help people with willpower. There are, there are like my teenage daughter bought herself a lockbox to put her phone in. There's an application, I forget the name of it, that causes you just to delay 5 seconds before your social media opens when you try and open the account. It's like, if schools could put together just a clearinghouse of like, here are all the useful tools that you could use as a parent in one place to make it easy so I understand how to download them. Like, I'm always struck by how little I know about the market of what's available to me to help me, and even like, I have shockingly stupid questions about like, how do I download it, how do I use it, et cetera. If I could just reduce the transaction cost to people finding tools to help them as parents, they would probably be more successful in helping their kids.
Right. And Graham?
I would say I'm also optimistic. I think that young people are smart and they know something's up. And I think people, if you could walk into a phone-free school where they're over that hump where students have now, it's just become a habit and part of the ritual, where in that school day, everyone's on the same page and phones are out of the picture and the existential dread of being filmed or videotaped and posted online is gone. People would be shocked at how quickly that changes the entire energy in a building, and I think that young people are smart enough to pick that up and run with it and apply it to other parts of their life, and that's what makes me excited, because every generation has to mold its own path.
Please join me in a round of applause for our panel. And for those of you watching online, all of the guests here in the Bronx, we have 2 buildings on our campus here at Vertex Partnership Academies. So everyone came in our primary building and they had to put their cell phone in a yonder pouch and walk to this second building with one of our students, just to give a sense of what it's like. And they freaked out a little bit, but our students accompanied them to say, it's okay. We do this every day and we're able to handle it. And then we gave them their phone back upon entry here. But we tried to give a little insight into what it's like to actually be free of a device. So thank you very much. This is an incredibly powerful discussion. For those of you who are here, you now get to eat some delicious Dominican, I think some Jamaican food. So next time we invite you, come to the Bronx, because you get lots of information and great food as well. Thank you very much.